We're so honored to have a couple of members from the archive of the Academy and the library join us earlier. I hope that you tuned in and have more ideas for how you want to get involved with all of the great shows and the home videos that they're going to bring. That was Wandering the World Wide Web. And now the show we've all been waiting for. Let's go to Zoom for Inside Hollywood with Koch.
Hi, everybody.
Yay.
Freda,
So,
go ahead, Freda.
The Goldwyns have been part of so many MPTF milestones throughout the decades, and today is one of them. And besides that, Hawk, do you realize that today is your 20th interview?
I did not know that.
So it is very fitting to have someone who's such a huge part of our legacy be your guest.
Oh, great, very excited. Well, thanks,
Thank
Freda,
you.
and
Thank
welcome
you.
everybody. Today I'm honored to speak with John Goldwyn. Of course, you know his grandfather, Samuel Goldwyn, was one of the founding fathers of our industry. His father, Sam Goldwyn Jr., was also a producer and created the Samuel Goldwyn Children's Center for the Motion Picture and Television Fund. John has followed in his family's tradition of philanthropy, as well as the legacy of working in our business. John was an executive at MGM. Before that, he started from the bottom at the Ladd Company, I think in the mailroom, then an executive at MGM. Then he was president of production at Paramount for many years. I was lucky enough to work with him because he, as president, gave me the okay. He approved of me to be the executive producer of Wayne's World. And thank you, John, because I have this house, I think, because of Wayne's World. So I appreciate it. And John has been a producer as well for a long, long time. His credits include of course, incredibly successful Dexter, I'm Not There, Manhunt, and with his dad, which we'll talk about later, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. John sits on the MPTF Social Service Committee and is devoted to MPTF. So again, I'm honored. Please welcome John Goldwyn. Hi, John, are you there?
I'm about to. Here we go.
There he is. Hi, John.
Hey, how are you?
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it.
Sure.
And of course, I guess the first question is, because you're a Goldwyn, as a kid, did you get to spend much time with your grandfather or your grandmother, Frances or Sam?
So, yes, so my grandfather was 79 when I was born. And other than my older sister, Catherine, who he adored, who was born before me, he didn't really have much use for children and even less babies. I think I could count on one hand the number of times I actually spoke to him. On the other hand, his wife, my grandmother, who was 54 when I was born, and apparently very involved in my mother's pregnancy, which was troubled. She was a very active presence in my life and in the life of my siblings. So I sort of have a sense of their life and their world through her. And she was a creature of another era. She really was. She was in that way a little anachronistic. She was very poised. She was very elegant. She was fiercely disciplined.
Has she been an actress?
She had been an actress, but that was not where she belonged. And I can talk a bit about that. But she came from Omaha, Nebraska. She shares that with Alexander Payne. As a young, very beautiful girl, she came to New York with her mother and her sisters, and she found her way into the Ziegfeld Follies. And there, Billie Burke, who was also Mrs. Florence Ziegfeld, and later Linda the Good Witch of the East in The Wizard of Oz, took a shine to her and kind of buffed and polished Frances Howard, as she was known, and turned her into a soignée urbane young lady. And she marries Sam Goldwyn in 1925. And I think at the time she was around 21 or 22 years old. And he was very much her senior, which is why there was a huge discrepancy when I was born.
Okay, so hang on one second. So she married Shmuel Goldfish,
He had been
who
previously
is from Poland,
correct.
worked his way, I guess, walked across Europe or
Correct.
somehow got across
It's
Europe.
all right. It's all right. That's exactly
So
right.
your mother was this classy, strong, your grandmother, I mean.
Yeah.
And then now is from what I've read about Sam, he was a tough guy. I mean, he knew what he wanted. How did that the class of your mom and the Polish Jew from Poland, how did that work?
Well, Sam, when they met, he had something called the Goldwyn Company in those days, which is where the famous lion that later became the MGM Leo the Lion began. And it wasn't always so easy for Sam Goldwyn in those days. He was an independent. He had the studios that later became the MGM Studios lot, but he had a payroll, and it was tough. He was an independent. It was hard.
I had heard, I don't know if this is true, but I had heard that the reason for the lion is that his office in New York was right across from the New York City Library that had that lion. And wow.
Specifically, Howard Dietz, who later went on to kind of run what we now call marketing at MGM, worked for the Goldwyn Company and also wrote songs. And he kind of did a lot of things. But what he did was he looked at the two lions that are in repose at the New York Public Library, which is when you look at the end of a MGM movie, the end credits, there's a lion in repose. That was that lion, right? But you're right, Hawk. That was the inspiration. And they went out with a camera and they shot that lion and they stuck him inside of the Ars Gratia Artis logo. And that's how and it became, as you know, the most famous logo in the world at one point.
Right.
But anyway, he was at a point in his life where he was thinking about his next move. The Goldwyn Company had been sold to the Loews Corporation, along with Louis B. Mayer Productions and the Metro Picture Company, and they formed that Metro Goldwyn Mayer Company. And he knew that he didn't want to have partners. He knew he wanted to be an independent, and he was also interested in sort of polishing up his image. He didn't want to really be Shmuel. He took the corporate name as his own. That was how Goldwyn became my last name, was because he took it as his own. And he had been in a marriage, and the marriage had failed. There was a daughter from that marriage. But one night, he walked into a party at Condé Nast's apartment in New York with Vilma Benke on his arm. And it was a party for Gloria Swanson, an engagement party for Gloria Swanson. And there at the party was this 21-year-old, very pretty, redheaded girl, and he asked her to dance. And that night said, "Will you have dinner with me tomorrow?" And she said yes, of course. And she, at the time, was a young actress and was part of a small company of players that included Louis Calhern and a bunch of people that was run by George Cukor, who was her greatest friend in the world.
Wow.
And so she goes to dinner with Sam Goldwyn, and they're talking, and she revealed herself to be very bright and good with people and had a kind of facility talking with people because she was very engaging. She was lovely, that he didn't have. And he realized that this was a very useful asset for him to have in his life because he struggled with the language. He would get frustrated. He could get angered very easily. And part of the reason why he had trouble in his business was because he had trouble getting along with people. And he realized that she could get along with anyone. He figured this out, I think, at the dinner. And so he asked her to marry him at the dinner. She said, "Wow, that's." First he said, "Would you like to come to California with me?" And she said, "Oh, I'd love to go to California. I've never been there." And he said, "Well, the only way you can go is if you go as my wife, because if you don't go as my wife, they won't respect you." And she said, "Well, we don't really know each other." He said, "We know each other well enough, but you've got to give me a decision because I've got to be on the train back to Hollywood tomorrow." So she leaves the dinner and she calls her best friend and the man with whom she was really in love, which was George Cukor, but that wasn't meant to be for all the obvious reasons that we now know. And she calls him up and she says, "George, Sam Goldwyn has just asked me to marry him. What should I do?" And George said, Frances, you don't have much of a career as an actress, but you have a very bright future as Mrs. Samuel Goldwyn. Take the part. That's a direct quote. Take the part.
Huh.
And so she went back to him and said, okay. He said, all right, well, we've got to get married in New Jersey because they don't require the blood test for syphilis there. And that way I can get on the train and you can get on the train with me. And so on their way, followed by her mother, who was a virulent anti-Semite, always referred to her dying day to as my grandfather as an Oriental, because Frances Goldwyn was a Catholic and a devout Catholic. And with this marriage, she would be lapsed and she suffered as a result of that. She was very devoted to her faith. But they're on the way to the Justice of the Peace in wherever it was in New Jersey. And she said, I hear there's this very bright magazine that's just come out called The New Yorker. So we're talking February 1925. And I'd like to pick it up on the way because it was a schlep in those days. And Sam Goldwyn says, you don't need to read that. You don't need to read that magazine. It's awful. It's trash. Don't read it. And she goes, no, Sam, I hear it's good. I want to read it. So they pull over to a newsstand and she gets it. And there was the first New Yorker profile and it was on Sam Goldwyn. And it was a trash job.
Oh.
And she's reading the story and he's watching her and he's seeing all of this go up in smoke. And she finishes the story and she looks and she goes, okay, now I know what I'm in for. I'm in. I get it. This is the piece I was missing. You were selling me, but now I think I've got it all now. And they got married and they stayed married until the day he died.
Wow. Boy, that's a Hollywood story.
And she was, and the thing that was interesting about her was that she believed that good manners could get you further than just about anything. And the thing about her that, among many things that I loved, was she spoke in a Mid-Atlantic accent. And I didn't know what that was until I watched old movies and discovered that actresses of the pre-war era, from about 1931 to about 1945, actresses spoke like she spoke, in that kind of funny, made-up accent that was very theatrical, that women of distinction had. She swore in that accent, and she swore for emphasis. And she was a very striking, very unusual woman. And they lived in this house up in Beverly Hills that's now owned by Taylor Swift and historically protected by Taylor Swift. And we would go up there periodically, my siblings and I, and we would go for these dinners where she would correct our table manners and teach us to sit straight and how to use a finger bowl. And it was like theater. The whole thing was like theater when we go there, because he was never around. Sam Goldwyn was really never around. He really didn't want to waste his time having dinner with a bunch of kids. And maybe once he was at the table, that's all. But she was very, very devoted to this ritual. And while we were having dinner in the dining room, we would then go into the library. And what happened during dinner was the staff would go in and they would transform the library into a screening room. And that was where I first saw movies, was in that screening room. And she would like to play Elvis Presley movies for my sister, Catherine, because she thought that she would enjoy them. And what she didn't realize about my sister was that she was knee deep in the Beatles by this point, right? So she had no interest in, but we learned to behave ourselves. And again, this thing of matter. And then we would all pile into a car that she had a chauffeur, and he would drive us back to our house in Brentwood, which was by any means a modest but nice house. And we could tell by the expression on our parents' faces whether we'd passed review. And that was sort of how life between the grandchildren and the Goldwyns existed.
So amazing. My question is, with all this, did your parents or Frances, how did you come to understand the magnitude of who your grandfather had been? Or did you, when was it that, did you study the history or?
No, this is sort of a two-part answer to this. I'll try to be brief, but my parents believed at that time that Hollywood, like the Greek Titans, ate their own, Okay, they just thought that Hollywood people didn't make very good parents. And my mother really had no interest in Hollywood. She was from New York. She came from a very distinguished family that were in the arts. Her father was the playwright Sidney Howard. Her grandfather was the conductor Walter Damrosch of the New York Symphony. I mean, you know, she was from a completely different world. And she thought Hollywood was silly. She felt that way. And she did not want, and my father did not want their kids raised in the belly of the beast. So we lived in Brentwood, which was at that time a sort of a more middle class, upper middle class area. My mother cooked dinner, you know, even after they divorced, she continued to cook dinner. It was, we had somebody kind of help out with stuff, but there was never swimming as servants or anything like that. We played in the street with the kids in the neighborhood. I went to a horse ranch up in Oregon with my brothers during the summer. I mean, it was all pretty normal because they didn't want their kids to be growing up around and in Hollywood, which meant that they kept everything about who my grandfather was a secret from us. And secrecy was a big thing in my family because my grandfather was an independent and at one point in the 30s got very sick, and they kept his illness a secret because he was afraid, my grandmother was afraid that if it got out, that he would be destroyed by his competitors who all wanted to see him go away. So it was very important to keep what they did and who they are, what was going on, a secret. And those secrets stayed inside of 1200 Laurel Lane, the house where they lived. So it wasn't until I was about 14 years old and I was away in boarding school in Colorado, I met a wonderful, wonderful guy named Richard Dobbins, who was head of the Film Society in this school. And he came up to me and he said, I just wanted to meet you. It's an honor to meet you. I said, why? Why? And he said, because you're John Goldwyn. I said, that's nice, but why does that matter? He goes, what do you mean, why does that matter? Do you know who you come from? I said, well, my dad is Sam and my mother's Jennifer. And no. Do you understand what you come from? And he was the one who explained it all to me. It didn't come from my family, it came from him. And then during this time, I started watching old movies on television because in those days, the local stations would run old movies because they didn't have a lot of rerun content.
Channel 9, $1 million movie.
$1 million movie. KTTV had, Channel 11 had it, Channel 5 had it, and Channel 9 had it. Those were the three stations in Los Angeles. And I started watching movies. And then I would, at that time, my parents were no longer together. And I would be at my father's house and I would come down to the breakfast table and I would say, tell me about Richard Woodmark, or tell me about Howard Hawks, or who is Ernst Haller, or how did Betty Davis get started, or what you know, it was like that. It was like that. Or who's Cobina Wright Jr., or who's, you know, I mean, I'd go for the really obscure stuff. And he would look at me like I was an alien that had just stepped off of a UFO. He's, well, you really want to know? And that was really what we bonded over. And he would fill in all the blanks on these movies for me because he grew up around these movies. And he knew all about them because he was a kid when those movies were getting made. And occasionally there would be a Goldwyn movie. And the first one that I saw was Dodsworth. And I went to him and I said, who is Ruth Chatterton? And who is Walter Houston? And I said, I recognize Sidney Howard. Isn't that Mom's dad? And who's the director? You know, William Wyler. Who was he? And then finally, tell me about Sam Goldwyn. What did he do on the movie? What was his job? Right? And that was how I learned. But it was because I initiated it by watching old movies on television. Because I was too young really to go to the movie theater.
I'm getting the chills because it's your legacy. And as of course, you know, I've been in the business my whole life. You know, Gable gave me a horseback ride when I was 4. That's how I started. So it's amazing. So aside from the movie end of it, when did or were you aware of what your grandfather and your father, how they got involved with the motion picture, the Motion Picture Fund?
Yeah, they talked about that a lot. It was a big part of my father's life because when my grandfather in the 40s, he started a foundation named, of course, after him. And it was originally designed to help support the state of Israel. And then he found out that the people who were responsible for administrating that money really wanted to start a film industry in Israel, and he got angry at them. So he yanked it away from the state of Israel. And for a long time, he would give it, he would give money to the MPTF. And then when he died, my father really got involved with it, and he hired a wonderful man named Meyer Gottlieb to help grow it. And my father decided that really what he wanted to do was to make sure that the Goldwyn name was planted on the MTVF in a way that made his contribution permanent. And among other things, they decided, my grandmother, my father decided that upon my grandmother's death, that the studio, Samuel Goldwyn Studios, would be actually given the proceeds from it. It was sold to Warner Brothers, but the proceeds from that sale would be given to the Motion Picture Television Relief Fund, which was a very substantial bequest at the time. And they always believed that because people were good to them when they were starting, and they were poor, both my grandmother and grandfather, and they also thought that it was very important to give back. And the one thing that was drilled into my head about the MTVF was that Hollywood is the only industry that has created a place, I don't want to call it a charity because it's not a charity, but a philanthropy that is dedicated to helping people in this industry. It's not sponsored by a specific company. It's sponsored by the people who work and live in the entertainment industry. So we have created our own facility to help us when we need help. And I have to say, under Bob's just miraculous stewardship recently, just what Bob Beecher has done for the MPTF is just stunning, really. It's incredible. But the foundation would give, and they, as you know, created a child care center, and there were some cottages that were named after my grandmother at the home. And but what happened was that we were then named, my siblings and I were named as members of the board of the foundation, and we made sure that upon my father's death that there would be money continuing to go to the foundation. And recently, specifically, we got very interested in the Social Services Committee, which Hawk, you and I sit on, which is doing great work. So yes, the fund was always a big issue in our family, and was discussed at length in foundation meetings, always.
So, okay, first of all of that stuff is great. I love the history. Thanks for filling everybody in on what your family has done for the home. Now let's get back to John Goldwyn. Okay. Now John Goldwyn goes to school. He's going to college, and you're going to come out of college. And what was your first job when you got out?
First job was I worked as a reader. When I got out of college in 1981, there was a writer's strike on the horizon, and so nobody was hiring. And what I did was I made a list of the people that I thought I would want to work for. And I remembered something that my father used to say to me, because it's very important that wherever you work, that you have access to the top man. No women in those days, it were just men, right? So you always have access to the top man because you need to have access to the decision makers. I said, okay. So I wrote a list of people that I wanted to work for. And like one was Orion Pictures, because I thought what they were doing was interesting. And one was Ray Stark, because he was Ray Stark, and one was the Ladd Company. And I was working at that time because I admired a lot what Alan had done at Fox when he was there. And I had followed that very closely and watched all those movies. And he seemed like a visionary to me in his own way. But I was, at that time, I couldn't get my foot in the door with any of these people. And I was working as a reader. I was paid $25 for a script, synopsis, and comment, and $45 for a novel. And my first boss, as it were, was Marty Ransohoff. And I would work really hard on these synopses, and I would bring them to his office, right? and he'd take the synopsis and he'd wave it. He goes, "Is it garbage or isn't it? That's all I need to know." I would say, "Marty, it's garbage. You wouldn't be giving it to me to read if it wasn't." And he would say, "Well, fine." He wouldn't read the synopsis. He didn't bother. He would just say, "That's the way it was."
Wait a second. You said something that was unbelievable to me when you said your name was John Goldwyn and you couldn't get a leg in anywhere.
No.
So my question is, being John Goldwyn, did you think it was going to give you a leg up, or did you think it was going to be a yoke around your neck?
I thought the name was a yoke, because it's a funny thing, Hawk, and you can appreciate this. When you're born into Hollywood, and other people like our mutual friend Karen Rosenthal, I know, understands this. It's when you're born into Hollywood, there's just an expectation that you're going to be a jerk, that you're going to be a spoiled brat. And usually there have been a few that have come before you that kind of define you before you walk in the room. Let's just be honest, right? So you're tasked with working extra hard at jobs that most people think you're too grand for. And you have to do those jobs and do them well and do them tirelessly to prove to them that there is no job that is beneath you. And that is the way in which you earn your stripes. And you kind of have to work just a little bit harder than most people would, because there's an expectation that you won't do those jobs. So in that respect, it was a yoke. And the name was a famous one. And so there was that. But on the other hand, and again, I know Karen understands this, I know you do, but you also have some curious insight into how the game works. You kind of know what to do and what not to do, who to listen to, who not to listen to, kind of when to move in with a comment, when to sit back and do nothing. And you kind of learn how to kind of parry and thrust your way into bigger and better jobs. And you kind of know the moves without ever having really done them, because you've kind of been around long enough to kind of see how it's done. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And it's what's so interesting. You and I have never discussed this, but I don't know if you've read my book or my book, but
I have it. I'll be reading it soon.
But I can tell you exactly the same thing for me. I was a second AD in Biloxi, Mississippi on a Natalie Wood movie. And I was running my tuchus off to prove to everybody. And I was in the bathroom and two guys walked in. And one said to the other, because I was in the John, the only reason that kid Koch got the job is because his dad's head of the studio. And my heart sunk because I had worked so hard. But the other guy said, yeah, right, he probably did get the job because of his dad, but he's really good at what he does and he's working real hard. Why don't you give him a break?
Right, that's great.
And I knew at that moment, I was 19, like you, I knew I had to work harder than anybody else to prove, because the name was Koch.
Yeah, and I'm very proud of my daughter in that respect, because her first job was working as a writer's PA on a TV show. And she never grumbled about it. And she kept doing that. And then she got a job as a writer's assistant. And then from a writer's assistant, she became a writer. And a work ethic was instilled. And not for a second does anybody think that she ever had any help. She did it all herself, like you did.
Can I tell you, first of all, it's the same thing. And for those of you who don't know, my son, Robbie, is your daughter's lawyer.
Yeah, and he's a great one. He's great. He's great.
I'm very proud of him.
Yeah.
What I love is when some people come up to me, and when we're talking about something, I said, well, maybe you ought to talk to my son, Robbie Koch. He's a lawyer at Hanson Jacobson. And they go, oh, Robbie Koch is your son? I never put it together. Yeah, and I love that for Robbie being.
There you go. Same thing.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Good. All right. So how did you get to that lad company, and how did you get to Allen and get the job?
There was a woman who was working for my father at the time who knew a woman who was there as a creative executive named Sarah Altschul, who's I don't think any longer in the industry. And I got a meeting with the office manager for a job in the mailroom. And irony of ironies, the person who was running the mailroom at the time was a guy named Charles Wessler, who picked up the Academy Award for the Green Book. Okay, it's like, there you go. Which is nice. I'm very happy for him. But in any event, I was working in the mailroom, and I was Laddie's driver because Laddie didn't drive a car. And so I would pick him up in the morning, and I would get him half a cup of black coffee and a bagel. And then we would drive in stone silence from Beverly Hills to Burbank. And the last company.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but for those of people who don't know, that's not uncommon to be with Laddie in stone silence.
He hasn't talked, right? But the Ladd Company was a very, very unique thing. Alan Ladd's run at Fox was unparalleled. I mean, the movies that he ushered in, of course, most famously Star Wars. And again, a movie freak, a total movie freak. When he saw Star Wars for the first time and they didn't have the visual effects, George cut in footage from old
Mr. Crab
movies, you know, to say this is kind of what it's going to look like. And Laddie got the references. He got them. You know, he understood what that was. Anyway, he, as you know, left Fox, and he was given at the time the single richest independent production deal ever given to anybody by Steve Ross at Warner, because Steve Ross's concept of Warner's in those days was to have individual units. Orion was one, Ladd Company was one, sort of CBS Theatrical Films was one, but not really. But and then there was Warner Brothers Studios, and he just said, I want to collect all the talent, much the way that, you know, they did with Warner Records. I want to collect all the talent under one umbrella, and then we'll figure out how to distribute all these movies. And Laddie went into, so he was part of Warner Communications, really. He was never part of Warner Brothers. He was part of Warner Communications. And I was lucky enough to go to work in his mailroom. And then I started reading scripts there. And one day, I was at the same time reading scripts for CBS Theatrical Films, actually. And I read a script called Risky Business at CBS Theatrical Films. And the Ladd Company was about to start production on a movie called Night Shift, starring not Michael Keaton, who was the new guy in town. It was starring Henry Winkler, who everybody, you know, believed was going to be a big movie star. And I was driving to work with Laddie, and I said to Laddie, I have read a script that I think is incredible, and I think it speaks to my audience, and I think you might want to just take a look at this before you pull the trigger on Night Shift. And he said, winning friends fast is this. So he said,
your cojones.
He said, why don't you just write up a paragraph on that and write up a paragraph on Night Shift and give it to me, okay? So I did, which he then proceeded to distribute to everybody. Alchol, who was campaigning to get Night Shift made. So I lost a friend there. But Gareth Wigan, who was working with Laddie, read them and said, oh, we should get this guy out of the mailroom. You know, let's bring him into a staff meeting. That's how I got in. And I sat in a staff meeting, which was in Laddie's office. And the very first day I was in the staff meeting, Gareth Wigan said, you know, we're making a movie, as you all know, called The Right Stuff up in San Francisco. And Irwin Winkler and Bob Chardoff are producing it, but you know, we really need a line producer to help, you know, and to help those guys out. And we're thinking of, you know, we brought Paul Maslansky onto it. And while he was up there, he saw this thing that he thinks could be a movie. And Laddie said cryptically, what thing? And he said, well, there were some police academy cadets. There was something happened. They needed to control something. There was some social disturbance, and they were hopeless. Absolutely hopeless. and Paul thinks this is an idea for a comedy. And if we don't want to do it, we can't hold him back. Don Steele, he thinks, wants to do it at Paramount. And I raised my hand and I said, this is a Phil Silvers comedy, because I was a movie freak, right? This is like a service comedy from the 40s. We should do this. This is a good idea. And Laddie said, well, if the mailboy thinks it's a good idea, then maybe we should do it. Literally is what he said.
So in the room are you and Jay Cantor, Gareth, Alan Stewart. Was Alan Stewart in the room?
Alan Stewart was not in the room yet. She was working for Sandy Lieberson in London.
Ah, got it.
Okay. So she was part of the Ladd Company, but she was working for Sandy in London. She eventually came into the room, but she wasn't in the room then.
I think Alan might be on. So hi, Alan, if you're on.
Hi, Alan. Yeah, I think she was in. I think she was in London at the time, working for Sandy.
Right.
So anyway, and then I just sort of went to work with Paul, and you're not asking about Police Academy, so I'm not. I won't.
No, that's okay. No, but you, because of your raising your hand and believing in something, which you've always done, as far as I know of you, you've never shied away from saying, this is what I believe, and take it or not, but this is what I believe.
Well, I was really lucky because Paul really embraced me. Paul is a wonderful guy.
What a sweetheart. Absolutely.
And he wanted to make me feel like I mattered in this project. It would not have happened without Paul, 100%. And I read the script. Paul read the script that later became Naked Gun, that was called Police Squad, written by Pat Proft and Neil Israel. And he said, I think this is funny. And he was right. It was really funny. And he found it. I didn't find it. He found it. And so we hired them. And then Laddie liked the script. And he said, well, why don't you go get a director? So we see somebody, Bob Zemeckis is interested in directing this movie.
Whoa.
So thank you. That's of course what anyone says. So I took it upon myself to watch Used Cars. I said to Paul, gosh, I just don't know if this guy really can do the comedy. I swear to you, I said that. So he didn't get the job because of me. So and then I got a call from a guy named David Schiff, who was at the William Morris office, and he represented a young actor named Tom Hanks. And Tom Hanks wanted to do Police Academy. And he said, look, man, I swear to God, if you don't, and he was just coming off of Bosom Buddies, and everybody thought Peter Scolari was the guy from Bosom Buddies. And no, he wants to do your movie, Paul Maslansky's movie, Police Academy. And if he doesn't do that, there's this movie about a fish over at Disney called Splash, that Brian Grazer, who did Night Shift, come on, man, you got to help me out. And I said, we're not ready to cast. We're just not there yet. We can't hire him. We're not going to hire him. So we were running out of, no one wanted to touch Police Academy except for this guy, Hugh Wilson, who'd done WKRP in Cincinnati. So I went to Laddie, I said, we have the best director in the world. We've got the guy who did WKRP in Cincinnati. And Laddie gave me that look like, don't kid a kidder. Like, I'm in on this, okay? Like, you need a director, and he's the best you can do. But anyway, we pull it together, and it comes time to, are we going to make this movie or aren't we? And at that time, the Ladd Company's fortune, there was Chariots of Fire, which was a bang start, wins the Academy Award. And there were a lot of what have gone on to become classic movies that were made, but in their time didn't perform. And I think Warner Brothers at that point was interested in making more movies, and they wanted to see these independent units kind of muscled out, and they wanted to become the dominant unit at WCI. So the Ladd Company was in retreat. So Laddie wanted to get a lot of stuff going. So it comes time to make Police Academy, and he goes, well, let's see what Sindra thinks. I'm saying, Sindra, that's his girlfriend. I don't think they were married yet at this point. Let's see what Sindra thinks. So he dials her up on the phone for everybody. She has no idea what she's gonna get. So, hi Sindra, it's Laddie. Hi Laddie, how are you? You're in the staff meeting. You're in the creative meeting this morning. Oh, hello everyone. How are you? Fine. John Goldwyn wants to make Police Academy. I really don't care one way or the other. You think we should make it? She said, well, yeah. I read that script. I think it's kind of funny. Laddie, I don't make these decisions, but I think it's funny. Yeah, I would make it. Okay, we're making the movie. That's how it happened. And that's the story of how Police Academy got made for $3 million.
Yes.
And the really nice story, which I can jump to, is it spawned a sequel. And Paul very graciously gave me an executive producer credit. He did not need to do that because I was still working with Laddie. And by that time, the Ladd Company was pretty much finished. But Police Academy 1 was an outsized hit. Paul God bless him, when he saw the first cut of Police Academy 1, he didn't have much money. He was struggling to pay his kids' tuition. He was living in a little apartment on Malibu. He was driving an old car that the motor had run out on. And he went out onto the beach that morning and threw up. That's what he did before he went to see the first cut of that movie. It was that for so many producers, they can get to that point so fast before they know it. And he and I watched the movie, and we thought it was really funny. The movie comes out, it does $88 million, which at the time was a very big gross for certainly a movie that cost $3 million. We're making the sequel, and Laddie turns to me and he hands me an envelope. And he goes, I want you to go to the set of Police Academy 2. I do not want you to open this envelope. I just want you to give it to Paul Maslansky. So I go to the set, and we were shooting at what used to be part of LA Zoo that time. And I said, Paul, this is from Laddie for you. He wants you to open it. And Paul said, oh God, what have I done now? Paul was a nervous guy. He opens the envelope. It's a check. He looks at the check, and he bursts into tears, and he falls to his knees. And he's shaking as he's holding this check. And from his knees, he holds it to me, and it's a check for $2 million. And it was just the first check. And he had never had money like that in his life. And I learned so much just from that experience. And what did that tell me? It told me how wonderful Alan Ladd was, one. And that Alan Ladd made it possible for me to give that gift to Paul. Said something about his character, which I forever appreciated. That you could really make a difference in a man's life by saying yes and no. I saw that, I understood that. That fortunes ebb and flow, and Laddie's fortunes in his career at that point were a bit ebbing because, the Ladd company was in a state of dissolution. But it didn't prevent him from doing the right thing for Paul, who was what you would understand a net participant. There was no gross for Paul in that movie, but it was so successful that he got the money. And it changed his life. And so I was working in a company where the phones weren't ringing anymore. And I learned what that was all about, that the phones ring when they want you and they don't ring when they don't. Bertie Brillstein wrote a book about that. And yet, also there was Paul, who suddenly was a super successful motion picture producer in a way that he never had been his entire life. So I kind of got this crash course in how the game really works and how it can change and how fortunes can change and how somebody as distinguished and important and knowledgeable and gifted as Alan Ladd rough patch. Whereas a guy who was virtually anonymous and was working very successfully as a line producer could suddenly have a very important imprint and a profile. And it was a very, very unique learning experience for me. And I learned none of that from my own family.
Great stories. And yes, I know of that because you, as I mentioned in my introduction, I was doing a movie at Paramount in Denton, Texas. And I got a call from Gary, said, would I fly back and meet with Lorne Michaels and John Goldwyn about Wayne's World? And it was you and Lorne who said yes. And well, the rest is history, because that was, again, we were all net participants and still going on, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's great.
Going on.
Congratulations and thank you.
I am thanking you. Congratulations. Thank you. But I do remember, just as a side story, you and I driving to Wayne, New Jersey, having gotten off a plane for, I think it was our second preview of Wayne's World. And you looked at me and said, everybody thinks this is just a filler. Do you think it could do some business, Hawk? And we went in, and I think the cards came back 98%.
Yeah.
Like 96% were excellent and 2% very good. I mean, Joe Farrell couldn't ever believe anything like that.
Barry London said, we got a 96, let's eat. And Mike Myers melted down and said, no, this is just the beginning of the editorial process. You don't understand. Yeah. And there was Lorne in between them, which is, where he did not want to be. Yeah.
So anyway, so the Ladd company kind of folds, and Laddie becomes head of MGM, and takes you with him.
Yeah.
And what were you now a vice president? What were you?
I don't remember what my title was, but it sort of didn't matter because I was doing what my father had told me to do, which is to stay close to the man at the top. But it was the first time Laddie had a boss, really, which was a man named Frank Rothman, who was running MGM in those days for Koch. And we made a lot of really good movies. We made Moonstruck, and we made A Fish Called Wanda. And I remember when I worked on A Fish Called Wanda, I went to London to visit the set. And Frank Rosenthal, Karen's father, was a consultant, I think, in those days to MGM and was living in London. And Frank would meet me at the hotel, and his driver would take Frank and me out to the studio, and Frank and I would visit the set together. That was the way it was done. And then we'd get back into Frank's car, and then we would drive back, and he would drop me off at his hotel. And that's how I got to know Frank Rosenfeld. And the drive was fantastic, because what he would do is he would tell me about MGM, what nobody else would tell me about MGM. He would tell me everything about MGM because he knew everything about MGM and was still pivotally involved in all the decisions that Kirk was making about MGM, because he ran MGM during the most profitable period in its history, right? And then Frank came back to LA, and I would be asked for lunch once a month. And there was this little country club in Century City. I would go have lunch with Frank Rosenfeld, and we would sit and we would talk. And once again, he just knew everything that was going on, and he was an incredible source of information for me when I worked at that company.
Boy, that's better than going to college, I can tell you.
For sure.
All right,
Yeah.
so now your stock is going up, and how do you get to Paramount? How does that move happen?
Frank's daughter Karen was working with me at Paramount. She had left working for Jerry Weintraub, and
No, but how'd you get to Paramount from?
I'm telling you. And so then she decided she wanted to stay at MGM, and I said, "You don't understand. You have a contract." She goes, "Uh-huh, I understand. I'm leaving MGM. I think I've got a job at Paramount." And I said, "You can't leave. You've got a contract." Uh-huh. She called Kirk Kerkorian, and she goes, "I'd like to leave." And he goes, "Okay." And he tells the people who were running MGM at that time, including Richard Berger, "How did you get this?" I said, "Don't ask. Let's just, the blood runs thicker than water. That's all I'm going to say." So she goes to Paramount, and I think puts a bug in David Kirkpatrick's ear, who was then the new president of the studio. And he offers me a job to come work at Paramount, which I do for less than I was earning at MGM, which was fine with me. Laddie was not happy about that, but I had a clause in my contract that allowed me to leave if Kirk ever sold the company, and he had just sold the company to Pathé. And the guy that was running Pathé was an Italian gangster, and I didn't want to work for him. And so I went to Paramount, and I believe my office was Bob Beecher's former office, actually. I think that was my first office.
Really?
So I went to work then, and I got into Paramount, and I was summoned to Frank Mancuso's office. And
So the hierarchy was.
it was Mancuso, and then it was David. And then there was Barry London was head of distribution. Arthur Cohen was running marketing, I think, in those days.
Yes. Right.
And Gary Lucchese was there, was head of production.
Right. But
and
was Stanley Jaffe the?
No, Stanley was a producer.
Wasn't there yet.
He and Sherry were doing, and Stanley was working on a movie he wanted to direct called School Ties at the time.
Yes. Right.
And Sherry was his partner. And Sherry was sort of making noises about leaving the business at that time. She was, I think she'd done Fatal Attraction, and she had a lot of success. And I think she was just feeling like, I've done everything I ever wanted to achieve in the movie business. Anyway, I'm summoned to Frank Mancuso's office, and he says, "All right, first of all, there's Bob Evans, who had been exiled to his house on Woodland Drive, because of everything we know about Bob Evans and the time, Koch, and and there was a murder of Roy Radin, and everything bad. But Frank loved him, and he was working on his biography at the time about with a guy named Charles Scribner who was writing it, and he said he's got a project by Leslie Charteris, a book by Leslie Charteris called The Saint. You have to get that made for my friend Bob Evans. Do everything in your power to. But I'm counting on you because Bob is too distracted. He won't get it made. You got to do that.
I just want to get it made.
The second person, we have a deal with Lorne Michaels here, and Lorne there was an attorney who had been in Lorne's firm, Warner Wolfland's firm, who knew him, who was Frank's attorney, and we got to make that deal work. He's a comedy guy, and so you got to help him get that movie made, and then we got to get a Star Trek movie going. The last one was a dud, and you got to go sit with Gene Roddenberry, and you got to help figure out how to get a Star Trek movie. So I leave his office, and there was an executive who was there, a guy who was there, who had also been a recent acquisition as an executive. And he walks into my office and he says, "You just took the bullets that I dodged." Because apparently the same conversation had happened with this executive when he had sort of figured out a way to maneuver this. I said, "Why?" He goes, "I mean, you've just been handed, it'll never work. You'll never get this done." And I said, "Wait a minute. Bob Evans is responsible for the renaissance of Hollywood. He's forgotten more than I'll ever know. It's Gene Roddenberry who brought space to television. That was a move that nobody had done before him. And Lorne Michaels revolutionized comedy in America. This is why I came to Paramount. I'm so lucky. I didn't think of it any other way. And we got The Saint made, and we got Sliver made. Neither of them were terribly good, both profitable. We got a Star Trek movie made, and I realized quickly that the person that I had to really invest time with was Leonard Nimoy, and I got to know Spock, and that was fantastic. And Nick Meyer wrote and directed it, and that one worked. And of course, Wayne's World. And as this was all going on, Gary and David were let go by Stanley Jaffe became head of the company. Stanley was very angry at David because he wouldn't give him the money that he wanted to make School Ties. And Stanley had something which nobody gets anymore. He had a put in his deal at Paramount, but the put was for an amount higher than what he needed to make the money. And he was appalled that the management in Hollywood would spend New York's money that way, because Stanley, as you know, because you worked for him, watched every shekel, right? So he just grotesque mismanagement and said something about it to Marty Davis, which is how he got the job running Gulf and Western, or Paramount Communications, it was called then. So he fired those guys, unfortunately, because I liked them both. And there was this period before Brandon Tartikoff could start, and those guys had been let go. And I was running things at Paramount. I was running production. There's this guy, you remember him, Bob, we called him Sarge. Bob, who was the head of physical production, older guy. Bob Relier. Oh, yeah. Bob Relier we called him Sarge, and he was running production, and he would sit like Moses on the Mount like this in these meetings, back and forth, listening to everything. I loved him. He was great. And he kept me from making mistakes. And it was me, and it was Karen, and it was a couple of other people. Don Granger was there, and and we all just sort of ran it without anybody telling us what to do.
Was Lance Young still there?
No, Lance had been gone for a while, but we just sort of took charge. And it was a really great time because no one was there to tell us what to do. And by the time Brandon came in, we had a bunch of movies up and running, right? Anyway, the first order of business for Stanley was to hire a head of production. And I decided I was going to throw my hat in the ring for this job. And Stanley just hated the idea of me because I belonged to a former regime. And I know that Bob Evans tried to get him to consider me. And Bob said to me that Stanley almost threw him out of the airplane when he did that. And then anyway, he interviewed some people, and he and Brandon interviewed some people. By now, Brandon is on board, and I'm kind of working with Brandon, and they're running out of names. And they said, okay, well, I guess we should talk to John Goldwyn. So I realized I had to get people to call on my behalf. So I got Eddie Murphy, and I got John McTiernan, who was a very big director, and I got Michael Ovitz, who I did not know, but I knew Richard Lovett, and Richard Lovett introduced me. And so the day of the night of the first preview of Wayne's World at what is now the Paramount, at the Sherry Lansing Theater, Stanley and Brandon gave me the job, right? And Stanley said to me, next to me, you're the youngest guy ever to have this job. I'm always younger than you when I had the job at Paramount, but you got it now, and it's yours to lose. And, you know, and I have to just preface it saying I loved Stanley, and I learned a lot from him. I absolutely loved him, and he was very authentic. He was great. And so anyway, I thought to myself, like you said, I'm either going to lose the job that I just got, or I'm going to keep it. I had no idea how that movie was going to perform for an audience. And Stanley went to the first 15 minutes of the preview, and they were all in, and it was clear the movie was going to be a big hit. And he clapped me on the back, and he said, I'm getting on a plane, I'm going back to New York. I'm not going to see the rest of the movie. And that was sort of how I got my job.
Wow. And then Sherry came in.
Yeah.
And then left. I remember I was doing a movie for you guys up in Portland, non-union, where we weren't telling anybody. And Brandon, in front of the press, said he was doing a non-union movie in Portland.
What was that? All I Want for Christmas? What was it?
Temp.
Huh?
The Temp.
The Temp with Faye Dunaway.
Well, Faye was in it. Tim Hutton and Laura Flynn Boyle.
Oh my God. I think I still have a coffee cup that says The Temp on it someplace. That's funny. Yeah, Brandon. Well, Brandon couldn't resist the press, you know, God bless him. And he was always quick with a witty remark, you know. I love Brandon, but he was in over his head in that job, you know, because he had everything. He had television, he had movies, he had more than he could handle, and had gone through a rough time in his personal life with his daughter Kala. And I think he just stepped into a job that was bigger than probably he understood it to be.
So then Sherry comes in.
And Sherry comes in.
The two of you were, you know, Dick and Jane forever. I mean, you know.
Yeah. It was a good thing, you know. That I was lucky because I had worked with Sherry on Indecent Proposal, so I had a sense of what that was going to be, and I knew that she would be a very hands-on manager. I knew that she would, because as a producer you have to be, you know this, Hawk, you're a producer. And I remember actually Karen and I, it's different when she becomes chairman. And I said, Karen, a leopard never changes its spots. You know, that's not going to happen. She'll just apply that same skill set to being, and she was that way. She was a very hands-on presence and everything. But Sherry, and this is where the business has so fundamentally changed.
Well, that was
Sherry believed, hey, I have to like the scripts. It's just that simple. I have to like the scripts. If I don't like the script, we're not going to make the movie. So your job is to make sure that you give me enough choices so that if I don't like one of the scripts or I don't think it's ready, there's something else that is. So I never thought of myself ever as being in charge of anything when I did that job, ever. I saw myself much more as somebody who facilitated options. That's what I did. And it was absolutely Sherry Lansing who made the decisions. Absolutely. John Dolgen didn't make the decisions. He deferred to Sherry to make those decisions creatively. And often we would disagree. And she invited the debate. She really did. She invited it with the people that worked with me. And I learned very soon, very fast, that first of all, I had to abdicate control to the people who worked with me in the creative area. And in the business affairs area, which I was responsible for. And so I realized my job is to hire people whose tastes are very diverse. And that way they'll collaborate because they won't be fighting for territory. So it was Michelle Manning, and it was Karen Rosenfeld, and it was Don Granger, and it was Dee Dee Gardner, and it was, you know the crew, it was everybody. They were all very independent. They were all very headstrong. They had very different tastes. They all worked incredibly hard. And the one thing they all shared was what's going to come out of John Goldwyn's mouth next, a sense of dread about me. And I would do this thing in staff meetings where they would give me stuff to read. And then I would say, Dee Dee, so this love story about two people who have cancer, let's just take a look. It's Friday afternoon, and here's the paper. Oh, there's a Tom Cruise movie. You want to see that? Oh, okay. Oh, here's a Julia Roberts. Let's turn the page again. Oh yeah, well, here's a big action movie. Oh, here's that movie about the two people dying of cancer that fall in love. And that's all I would say. And that was it. And so they all lived in, that was typical of the kind of thing I would do. And I would just, what I would do though is I'd make them, you have to understand the end point here. I know it's good on a piece of paper, and I'm sure the script is incredibly well wrought, but you've got to think like I have to think, and you've got to anticipate all the questions that I'm going to be asked, and you have to ask yourselves those questions, because advocacy starts at the beginning, not just when the script gets developed. I'm assuming you guys are going to develop good scripts, but you got to understand that the idea has a reason to exist in our world. And we had a whiteboard in my office, and we would have, it was a magnet, there would be magnetic strips with the titles of films. And we would always put the movies that failed up there. And the number of movies that failed in the world far outnumbered the number of movies that succeeded. And that was how everybody on our team understood how great the risk was and how bad the odds were. So by the time it got to Sherry, Karen and Michelle and Don and Dee Dee and everybody else that was there really deeply understood why they wanted to make the movie. And it was usually their passion and their understanding when they were called upon to ask about it that got it done.
Really phenomenal. So tell me now, because you started to say it, what do you think the difference is in running the studios today as opposed to when you were president of production?
Well, when I was president of production, there was, first of all, there was still in all of the studios a singular, visionary, autocratic presence. It was one person. It's like our mutual friend Lauren likes to say, nothing any good is ever born in an atmosphere of consensus, okay? And he runs his show that way. He exercises his editorial prerogative. He never tells people what's funny. He just simply trims out the stuff that he doesn't think he's got time for on the show. But we had that with Sherry. She was that presence. Certainly there were people who were doing it. Ned was that presence before Sherry at Paramount for sure. And that defining presence, I don't think lives in our world anymore. And so many of the companies are driven, especially in the streaming universe, algorithmically. The only person that I can point to who really is a version of that is Kevin Feige and the Marvel universe. Because the people even at Disney now, I think they're in the brand management business more than they are the kind of the creative script picking business. And they've abdicated that to people who run those different labels for them. And now that we're living in a fractured environment where everything's a portal. There's the portal for theatrical, there's a portal for streaming, there's a portal for what we now call linear television that we used to call network television at a time when there were only 3 channels that you had. It's become so fractionalized that all you want is just to have something that's going to make enough noise to raise above the din of everything else, and hopefully get somebody to log on. That's all it's about, is logging on. People only make 3 seasons of something now because then it wears itself out and it gets too expensive and people want something that's new, So it's just not hand built in the same way by the people inside the companies the way it was at Paramount when I was there. And I take nothing away from the wonderful producers, you, Scott Rudin, Stanley when he was doing it. He was a great producer. Lorne, Tom and Paula when they were with Cruz Wagner Productions. They were very, when Mel Gibson brought his business to our studio, these people cared deeply about what they were making and doing. I'm not saying producers don't do that anymore, but it is no longer a job that is dependent upon in a way that it was when I was there. We depended very much on the producers, and it was a very symbiotic relationship that we had. And that is completely different. Now, that does not exist in the same way.
And you're still working and you're still producing. You're still developing. I saw you're doing something, saw trades the other day. You're doing a couple of things with Karen again.
Yeah.
But the two of you. But
yeah.
do you take a deep breath and go, oh my God, this is a great script or this is a great project, but how am I ever do I really want to do the fight to try and get something made now that was a little bit easier before because you had one person who you knew would take a look at it?
I've never been a volume person, to my own detriment,
Not necessarily.
But like when I did Dexter, I knew Bob Greenblatt, and so did Sarah Collison, who brought me the book. We knew him. So we knew the guy that was going to say yes and no. If I don't have access to that, I don't bother. Again, I'm going back to this thing that was, axiomatic to the way my family felt about the industry,
Right.
Because, and I know that sounds probably disrespectful of all the people that labor in these jobs, but I feel like their taste and their opinions have been so diminished by kind of the system that exists now, that if I don't have a real understanding of what the creative point of view of a specific company is and whether or not I've got something that will serve that need, I don't try. And I'm really blunt with the people that I work with. People come to me, I've got this great script. I'm sure it's great. I'm sure it's a work of staggering genius. I have no doubt. But I say that, but I'm not the guy to do this for you. I'm not additive. I can't help you. And I'm very blunt about the fact that, that my scope is small and that my level of influence is not what it once was. But if I do have access to something that I think will understand what this is, I'll take my shot and I'll work really hard to close. And so, that's sort of how I operate now.
What is your favorite part and what is your least favorite part of producing?
My favorite part of it is the level of intimacy that develops working on a set with the people that you're working with. And if you've done the job right and you've hired the right people at the outset or gotten the right people hired at the outset, it's so much fun to see it all kind of come alive. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's a like
what I would
talk about. There's what?
I'd say that would be my answer. Yeah. I love the family. And for 1 second, just to tie it back.
Yeah.
It's the family that is the motion picture and television fund.
Yeah.
All those people
that
you love being with. Right. Keep going.
But it's that thing Mike Nichols used to talk about, where he'd say, yes, there's the script, and yes, there's everything, but there's that thing that happens suddenly and unpredictably between the actors and the camera lens that the script never anticipates. And you watch that happen and you're present for that. And then you're sitting in an editing room and you figure out a way to reconfigure a story that never was quite right on the page, but can be rewritten in post. All of that stuff that you are present for as an executive, but you're 2 steps removed from it because you've got so much going on. You can't devote the kind of time and energy that was really required. As a producer, you can get very granular, and that's an altogether different skill set. And it's a lot of fun. When you're working with good people, it's a drag when you're working with people that aren't fun and talented. But when they're really talented and fun and excited, and you feel like you're doing something that matters, it's great.
What's your least favorite part of producing?
Having to convince people that your idea is better than theirs. and having to manage that in a way that doesn't make those people feel diminished. Because my tendency, unfortunately, as you know, is to be brusque. And, you know, I always like to find the shortest distance between 2 points. And that's not always how to get something done. And you have to be politic, and you have to be deferential, and you have to be patient. And the one thing I have learned in my life through producing is patience. Because if you don't have patience, you can compromise the thing that really matters, which is the thing that you're making.
Would you prefer to go back to being a buyer as opposed to a seller?
Oh, never, 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 never again, ever in my life. Colleen was always saying, honey, you should go back and run a studio. I'd say, Colleen, I don't recognize what that is. And honey, I'm telling you, you're a genius. You could do. I said, no, Colleen, I can't do that anymore. I can't do it. And I really mean that. And I think those jobs also belong to young people. I really think it's important that people doing those jobs, I think you age out of them. I really do. I think there's a point at which your taste, there's been some sort of a generational shift. We're seeing it now, for sure. We're seeing it now. If somebody had told me that the world would look like it looks like now in the world of television 5, 8 years ago, I would have said, really? You think so? How? And here we are. And it's a bunch of new voices, and it's their time, you know, really, it's the way I look at it.
Mm-hmm. Why did you leave Paramount?
I left Paramount for a couple of reasons. First of all, I had to cope with my identity. And that involves, as they used to say, and they say no more, coming out of the closet. And that was very hard because I knew it would cause pain in people's lives. It would cause pain for Colleen, and that made me very sad. It would cause pain for my daughter, and that I had to work on because she was young at the time and didn't really understand what was happening. And that required a lot of focus and concentration. And I knew it would be confusing for the town. And I refused to live in secrecy about it anymore. And it was. It was confusing for a lot of people. And I think even probably for people that I was working with inside Paramount. And I just have to say that on that front, Sherry and John both, but Sherry, who I told first, was miraculous about it. She could not have been more empathetic and more, she was just very intelligent about it all, you know, and she revealed herself to be a real friend in that moment. She was my supporter, and she was my shield. She was great during that period. But what I realized quite quickly was that I simply no longer had the focus for the job, and I had run out of interest in doing the job. And I think Sherry sensed this too. And I've always felt, you know, she always says to me, honey, you weren't fired. But I think we both realized the jig is up. You know, we did, and it was time for me to move on. And I was very happy that I left behind enough good stuff so that they could go on. And when down the line came into the job, he wasn't left with an empty closet, because when I got to Paramount, there was nothing there when I took the job. And fortunately, they had big franchises were in the works, and, you know, War of the Worlds was in the world, and Longest Yard was in the works. So at least there was stuff there that they could, you know, that they had to, while they got their own stuff going. And that was when I went into a producing deal at Paramount.
And that's when you hooked up with Lauren, right?
That was after. I was in the producing deal for a while, and then I knew John Dolgen was leaving the company, and I thought it was only a matter of time before Sherry left. I didn't know that she would leave, but I just had a sense it was only a matter of time before Sherry left. And I realized at that moment that there would be a whole new group in there, and I would suddenly lose my berth in a funny way. And Lauren and I always talked about being partners, and you know, he'd never had a partner, and I was wary of partnerships because generally they don't last. You know, Dick and David had one that was, you know, probably the longest that I can think of. Anyway, we decided to get into business together, and I said to Lauren, I remember saying to him, one day he called me, he said, "Here's how this is going to work. You and I are going to have a fight, and this partnership is going to end. It's inevitable. So just know it, right? I said, right. But here's the one thing I'm going to say to you, Lauren. I'm not going to let that happen. I'll leave before that happens, because the one thing I don't want to ever lose is the friendship, because I like our friendship. And I like it way better than the partnership. But let's just see where it takes us. And so we made a bunch of movies together. And there just came a moment at which I realized when Brad Gray came into the company and Adam Goodman was running things, and I realized I've overstayed my welcome. This has nothing to do with Lauren. This has everything to do with, I've overstayed my welcome at Paramount. And I was in a room with Brad, and it just came tumbling out of my mouth. And I just said, I don't belong here anymore. I really don't. I appreciate everything you're doing for us. And I know that you are a great friend of Lauren's, and Brad said, I consider him my best friend. And I said, and that should survive and go on, and I'm sure it will, but you don't need me. And then I told Lauren, and I said, I think I just ended our partnership. And there were some attempts by various people to kind of patch it up, but I knew I had to leave Paramount. That's when I left. And then I've just been on my own since.
Do you ever think about the fact that as you tell these stories today, John, that there's an awful lot of Samuel Goldwyn in you?
No, I don't think
Oh,
that
yes.
at all.
Oh, yes.
No. You know, somebody, I did an interview for the LA Times once. I think it was when Scott was, the book was released, or maybe it was a documentary that was done. And there was a great reporter that ran the kind of the Hollywood beat. I can't remember his name. What is it? Bright guy. I can't remember.
Dale Pollock, no?
Dale Pollock, thank you. Was it Dale? No, it wasn't Dale Pollock. It wasn't Dale Pollock. It was somebody after him. Anyway, he came in and had an interview with me. And he said to me, what would you say to Sam Goldwyn if Sam Goldwyn walked into your office? And I said, well, first of all, he'd see it was Paramount, and he had a bad breakup with Paramount. So he'd be in a rage by the time he walked on the lawn. I said, but even before he got to my office, he'd say, what am I doing here? Because Sam Goldwyn of today wouldn't be in the movie business. Sam Goldwyn of today would be figuring out how to do something that's unique to his brand in some other creative space, and I suspect it would be tech. But he wouldn't be in the movie business, because there'd be nothing in the business of the movie business that would hold any interest for him anymore.
I meant it in that you knew yourself, you were independent, you were able to walk into Brad Gray, where you've got a big deal with Lauren, and say, no, I'm going to go my own way now.
Yeah. That's about survival. And, sometimes you have to make bold moves to survive. And the one thing that mattered to Sam Goldwyn, which is why he brought Frances Goldwyn into his life. I mean, they had separate bedrooms. Okay. They had separate bedrooms. But she was essential to him, because she was essential to his survival. And he loved her very much. I don't mean to suggest that he didn't, but survival was the thing he cared about most. He of his contemporaries, Louis Selznick, his son David Selznick. I mean, all these people that were, Griffith, Chaplin, even in the 50s. We're great friends of his. All saw them one by one sort of go up in flames. He was determined never to let that happen to himself. And that required him to be ruthlessly honest with himself about who he was. And that's sort of how I've been about myself in my life.
Well, that's exactly why I said, you tried to deny it, John. And I'm just saying, in a good way, I think your grandfather would be very proud of you.
That's very nice of you.
I know your dad.
That means a lot. Thank you.
And I know your dad is or was too. So let me ask, we've only got a few more minutes. What advice would you give to young people today wanting to get into our business, who are, in film school somewhere, or they're dreaming about being John Goldwyn?
Well, I don't know what John Goldwyn means to them in the configuration of what the industry is now, because I don't think there's people who do what I do in the same way that I did it. Okay, so let me just start there. But I guess what I would say is, first of all, get to know your peers. Get to know what people think is working. But then I would say to them, don't jump in unless you really feel like you can make a difference in whatever it is that you decide to do. don't do it. Only step in if you really feel like I could leave a mark. And that's going to mean spending a lot of time hearing the word no. And you've got to learn to be able to summon the strength to wash that away. And don't take it as gospel, because that doesn't mean that they're right. You know, I mean, it's funny. I mean, too, everybody thought Kramer versus Kramer was a TV movie. And I remember when Bob was talking about it, he was talking about Justin Henry, and you're asking about Justin Henry. But then one day at in London, they go to Dustin Hoffman's hotel, and they get Dustin, and suddenly it's no longer just a TV movie. You just never know when things can change, and a no can become a yes for reasons that are beyond your control. But if you understand why you want to make something and why it deserves to be made, and you cling to that, then it'll happen.
I just went to something that we all did together, Primal Fear, where there was no way. Huh?
Perfect example.
There was no way Sherry and you, or I guess Sherry, was going to make that movie just with Richard Gere without another major star playing the kid.
Edward Norton.
And then Edward comes in and does that screen test and the second screen test, and it's greenlit because
Correct.
All of us knew that this was, and he got nominated for an Oscar for that role.
And I read Bill Deal's book the weekend Wayne's World opened. And I called Stanley in New York. This is the thing I keep going back to. I had access to the guy who could say yes and no. I called Stanley and I said, I have witness for the prosecution for a modern audience. That's all I told him, right? Because there never was an Aaron counselor. It's the end of that movie, right?
Right.
And but look at the talented collective. We had Gary as the producer, Gary Lucchese, and he got Steve Zalian. And Bob Benton came in and did a draft of the script at one point, and which was wonderful. I thought it was great, but Richard Gere, I think, preferred, for whatever reasons, I think the Zalian script more, but we had a Bob Benton script and a Steve Zalian script. And then we got the guy who was the director from LA Law to do it because Alan Ladd Jr. told me he was a great director. I mean, it was built by hand, that thing. It's exactly what I'm talking about. And it was a hit.
Yeah.
But I don't think it gets built like that anymore. Not in the same way.
Well, I'm going to invite Beecher and Jen and just to come back on, and Freda. They may have a question or two before we end.
Right.
John, this has been, I don't know about you. I mean, I had a whole host of questions that I never got a chance to answer because I was just so taken with this interview. And thank you.
And I feel like I've been in a psychotherapy session, so thank you very much, Hawk.
I'll send you a bill.
It's been a great kind of film school experience, just to hear some of the history, but also hear the dynamics and how important no is. And I think one of the critical things is how you wash no away and you move on to the next thing. That was beautiful.
Great.
So Hawk, should I ask the question that we ask everybody? Okay. This is a very difficult question, and we've been asking it of everybody since the beginning of the pandemic so that we can keep our list going. What is your favorite movie?
I knew I was going to get asked this question. I don't know. Because movies have been such an important part of my life. I guess the way I would answer that question is I would ask the question slightly differently, which is, what movie made you decide to get into the movie business? Okay, and that I can answer, which is The Last Picture Show. My mother took my brother Tony and I to see it because she thought it was a comedy. And I had stayed up night after night after night watching movies directed by people like Howard Hawks and Orson Welles and George Cukor and William Wyler and Billy Wilder and George Stevens. And so when I saw a black and white movie in present time and all of the cinematic references were from movies I had seen, it was like the gestalt of everything I loved in one movie. So I would have to say that's why. That's the movie. And and Colleen Camp introduced me to Peter Bogdanovich, and it was quickly. It was one of the most. It was Cher's birthday party, and it was a wrap party for Mask at Peter's house. And I went into his library, and there was a script of The Last Picture Show, and I pulled it down from the cupboard, and I opened it up, and there was the script on one side, and then on the opposing page were all of the shot diagrams. And I went to the script and I saw how he figured out how to shoot that movie in his study. And I didn't care about all the movie stars that were in his yard. I was in Peter Bogdanovich's house looking at a Bible, as far as I was concerned.
And I would have grabbed What's Up, Doc.
It's a great movie. Right.
What about the television show?
I was going to say our follow-up to that is, what's your favorite television series?
I would say Mad Men. Yeah.
Very nice.
I'd say Mad Men. Yeah, I think it's perfect. Yeah.
Mr. Beecher? Sorry, Mr. Beecher? Are you there?
He's there.
Hi, Bob.
Hi.
We can hear you.
John, that was amazing.
I took your office. I think it was your office I took at Paramount.
Yeah, it was. I hope you liked the furnishings. I'm sure there was a good budget to back in those.
No, there wasn't. I don't think I changed anything.
Okay.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Mr. Beecher, I don't know if you heard, but he gave you a very big compliment earlier in the program.
I put my hands over my ears and climbed under my desk.
Bob does.
But I appreciate it.
Yeah, he knows.
Well, this has been, John, I'm very serious. This has been incredibly special.
Yeah.
Thank you for what you do for the fund. Thank you for being here with me today.
Of course, my pleasure.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, you got it, Hawk. Thank you for asking me. I'm honored.
Thank you so much, John.
Bye, everyone.
We need a part 2, Hawk. Is that what you were saying? Part 2 coming up?
Maybe at some point, John and I can do it at the home in the auditorium with the audience, with the residents there. That would be.
I'd love nothing more to do it with you. That would be fun.
Great.
Great.
Okay, guys. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
guys.